Good morning, students. This is the second video where we'll focus on the composing section and in particular narrative. So if you are, I suppose, more inclined to write an imaginative response, this is the video for you. I've posted already the persuasive and interpretive video guide that should give you some tips and tricks as to how to better persuade. This video will be looking at how we can better engage our readers through language. So bear with me as we go through a couple of these slides, just to point out things that where you will necessarily find things is in Connect. So if you go to Connect, under the Creating tab, okay, I haven't put it into Imaginative, I've just put it into Creating, which is the section. You will see from about lesson 3 onwards, composing from here, the pedestrian, down to the composing the pedestrian sample. This is the actual PowerPoint we're using today, but what you will need up is this text here, which is the full text of, cancel that, that's not correct. This one here, the pedestrian full text, is the full text that we'll be looking at today as a good answer of just very well written fiction, and it's very accessible. So we'll be looking at that today, and we may be looking at some more dystopian text later on. So just have that section and that document ready to go for this session. If I head back to the PowerPoint now, we just want to review, I suppose, the narrative form and what the purpose of the narrative form is. I suppose we know it's to tell a story. It can be real, or it can be imagined, or a mix of both. So I suppose the goal with imaginative, sorry, I'm just drinking my tea, which I realise it's got a really cool, you put the cool in school. Yeah, I do. The purpose of narrative is to engage your reader, we are aware, through exposition, characters, conflict, and those sorts of things. You know what a narrative is. I'm not going to beat around the bush and go into what plot, conflict, setting, those sorts of aspects are. However, I would recommend having a look at the narrative elements of fiction handout placed on Connect. I will print out copies for this because I'm having difficulty finding it, but I will put it on Connect. So the first thing I want to bring your attention to is genre, because I think it's an aspect of the course that hasn't really been covered in year 11, nor is it done really well in lower school. But we should be aware by now that genre is made up into two parts, or two aspects, where we're looking at form and content. If you take the Avengers, for example, it's a feature film firstly in terms of the form, but then it can also be classified under an action or a superhero text. Now, the reason I bring up genre is because you need to know your genre and perhaps consider the genre of form or content with regard to what you're writing and how you're going to make innovative choices within that genre. Often questions you will see in this section will ask you to do something where you're challenging generic conventions, again, be it of form or content, or making innovative use of language to present a genre, something of that nature. So just something to consider. Know your genres. For example, in a feature film, not really applicable to the writing section, but you would expect to see camera shots, costume, lighting, those aspects. But then furthermore, you need to know your genre of content so that you can better work with that understanding when creating your composing tasks. So know your westerns, know your science fiction genre, know your dystopian genre. Miss Thurston's looking at me rather confused now because I'm talking into a laptop. So Miss Thurston's just left. I was saying about the genres, know your genres, know your text types. Okay, so we are going to focus on one genre today, and it's the dystopian genre. It's a genre I love. It's all the rage at the moment. It still is the rage. You've probably heard or read The Hunger Games. It's quite popular for a teen audience or a young adult audience. It's quite accessible, but it is quite a complex genre, particularly if you look at the history of the dystopian genre, which is what we're going to do slightly today. Hopefully there's not too many interruptions. I'm in the staff room at the moment. So what we want to be understanding is know your genre and work out ways that you can either reinforce or subvert. So that word subvert comes up a lot. Now, to subvert means obviously to flip something on its head. If you take the series Jessica Jones, it presents somewhat of an anti-hero genre in that it's presenting an incredibly strong female protagonist, but one that is unstable and violent. Very different to, I suppose, the superheroes in the 1950s. Another one that doesn't necessarily subvert, but maybe just challenges would be something like Wonder Woman or what's that new one? Captain Marvel, which by virtue of just having a female protagonist, it's subverting, or not subverting necessarily, challenging. There is, I suppose, subtle differences between subverting. I think subverting is really turning it on its head for a particular purpose, and the purpose is often, contextual perhaps, but think about how we could just challenge the genre here, because it's often something that you're asked to do, and it's something that will take your response from the middling 50s, 60s to that 70, because you're making innovative choices, obviously for effect and for purpose. What we're going to look at now is just the dystopian genre, so you need to know this genre before we get into the actual exploration of the text, the pedestrian. So what I'd suggest for you to do is actually have a look at this video, and just make a list of the conventions associated with the dystopian genre. You might be quite familiar with the dystopian genre, but again, this video is a TEDx talk, 5.5 minutes. Okay, so just click through the link, watch the video, then come back, and we'll have a look at some of the conventions that we typically associate with the dystopian genre. So just pause your video here and watch the YouTube clip. Excellent, hopefully you found that interesting. I really enjoyed that video. But if you look now, some of the conventions that we expect to find in the dystopian genre are propaganda, freedom is restricted, concept is worshipped, constant surveillance, this idea of a dehumanized state where we're moving away from the individual and working for the collective, very communist in nature. We also have this view that the natural world is banished in favor of the technical and the industrial age, and then this view that conformity and conformity will out over free will and individuality. So these are sorts of conventions that you'd expect to find within a dystopian text. Further, you're expecting to find a character, perhaps, who is going to go against the majority or go against the state. And this is what we see in the pedestrian. So I really like the pedestrian as an example of just an effective narrative. It's beautifully written and structured with a great conflict, and I think it's something that every student should be reading. So what I'd like you to do now is, before we read it, we're going to quickly go through what the pedestrian is and why I believe it's an effective short story. I believe some of you would have read this before in year 9 or 10, and I think that's great that you got that exposure to it early on. I do think it's more of an advanced text, rather year 9s are not going to get the same out of it as you would in, say, year 11 and 12 ATAR. But in any case, let's have a quick look at the contextual factors that led to the creation of this. So it was produced in 1951 by Bradbury. Bradbury is a prolific science fiction and speculative fiction writer. It's set in the future where technology has kind of spread throughout society, but crime is at an all-time low as a result. And it follows Leonard Mead, the central protagonist, the only real character within this text, as he's simply walking through an empty street at night. If you know nothing about Bradbury, he's one of the pioneers of science fiction and dystopian genres, and his work is considered speculative. So he's always asking the question, what if technological advances get to the point where we're minimizing human interactions? What if? So some of the themes and issues that come out of his work and the dystopian text in general, I'm not sure if it's glitching, dystopian text in general relate to this idea of loss of nature and this over-reliance on technology that leads to this loss of nature and the death of creativity. And you can see that in here, and particularly as it pertains to this loss of culture and independence. So it was written after World War II, when we saw this boom in technology and we saw that it is destroying interactions. And it was written during the height of the Cold War, where we had two superpowers in the form of the USSR and the USSA really fighting for hegemony. And hegemony just means political dominance. So there could only be really one world superpower, and obviously we know that the US prevailed. But during that time, the fight and the race for that advancement in technology, and then eventually the space race, for example, led to that increasing fear about what will happen if if television was to become all-powerful and all-being. And we still have those concerns today with AI, and we're not quite sure where AI sits with us comfortably in terms of a moral and ethical kind of dilemma. What we did see is, 1945 saw that explosion of TV and commercialism and consumerism, and Bradbury saw television as that ruining that creativity. He saw it as a device and a symbol of control. It was enslaving the population to become, mindless automatons, in that people were becoming hypnotized and transfixed by the pretty colours, or not then, but eventually the pretty colours of TV. So what I'd like you to do now, with this, I suppose, knowledge in mind, is I want you to read through The Pedestrian first. Just simply read through, and then following on from your read through, I just want you to go through and identify the language features, how the characters are constructed, the society, some of the issues that are present within the text, and then consider what aspects of construction you could bring to your work. There is a lot within his text, a lot of beautiful writing, and it's very well structured, that I think many of you could look at as a good example of, okay, where a starting off point for your composing tasks on Friday. So just pause the video here and just have a think, read through, and then go through again and annotate. This should take you about 30 minutes, 35 minutes to look through, first identify the language, and then look at characters, and then genre. So just take that time now. So pausing the video. Okay, hopefully that gave you plenty of time to have a look at the text and consider the language being used, but also the ideas and issues that are present within the text. I just think the opening of the text is beautiful in the imagery it creates, but also, I suppose, establishing the character and how he is a bit of a rebel within this world. So to enter out into that silence that was the city at 8 o'clock of a misty evening in November, to put your feet upon that buckling concrete walk, to step over grassy seams and make your way, hands in pockets, through the silences. That was what Mr. Leonard Mead most dearly loved to do. Just presenting this individual who's a bit different, who's not conforming. He would stand upon the corner of an intersection and peer down long moonlit avenues of sidewalk in 4 directions, deciding which way to go. But it really made no difference. He was alone in this world of AD 2053, or as good as alone. And with the final decision made, a path selected, he would stride off, sending patterns of frosty air before him like the smoke of a cigar. Just this characterization of him as being someone on the outer, someone who's other, but also this relationship he has with nature, which was, I suppose, not valued within 1950s ones where you had that technology. As you go through, you see this contrast between him being an individual on the outer, walking in nature, and the contrast there with everyone else within inside, and you start to see that death-like, morgue-like imagery of the graveyards and the gravestones, sort of Bradbury suggesting that, people are dying as a result, whether it be literally or figuratively, but people dying as a result of their willingness just to conform to government expectation and political ideology. In any case, if we go back to the task, hopefully you're able to see, we'll come back to this text a few times, but what I want you to consider for a journal task and for a composing task is to consider how you could rewrite the ending. What we can do in composing is reimagine text that we've done before, okay, when you are responding and creating. So how could you continue the story for Leonard Mead by starting from where the author finished in that back of the police car? Remembering that if we are to emulate the same writing style as Bradbury, you need to just keep the choices that he made in mind so that there is a seamless transition from Bradbury to your work. Alternatively, consider a different ending to the short story that doesn't involve Leonard being picked up by the police. So where would it go? How could you continue this beautiful narrative if he wasn't to be picked up by the police? Would he have met someone else? I don't think so. But what could you do to kind of continue that story? I'm happy to look over any work that you present to me and show me, but I think this is a good starting point for some of you, just to get you thinking about writing effectively within genre. What I've got for these last few slides is just a quick quiz and just something for you to consider. I'll probably go over this today in class as a bit of a starter activity, but just some things to consider when we're writing, because it does obviously affect our writing, whether it be creative or responding. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. Bye.